Hi, everyone. I'm Aliza Sherman. I'm the CEO of Ellementa. I'm the author of the book Cannabis and CBD for Health and Wellness with my co-author, Dr. Junilla Chin. That's actually my 12th book, but my first about cannabis and CBD as I move into the world of wellness. As I move into that world of wellness, I was looking to explore beyond cannabis and CBD. I'm really into alternative health, like I'm sure a lot of you are. I'm really into herbs, plant medicine. I believe in homeopathy, aromatherapy, just looking for ways of more naturally helping my body and my brain find that balance, that word balance, which I don't really love. But as I was looking at these topics, I got this email about Mindbloom, a company that's looking at psychedelics. Now, I'm getting a lot of emails right now about psychedelics for wellness, for mental health. And I thought, wow, I know nothing about that. And I was so curious. So here we are. We're here with Kristin Arden of Mindbloom. I'm going to turn it over to her to let you know who she is, what she does, and what Mindbloom is all about. Then we're going to dive into speaking about ketamine, which I know zero about. So I cannot wait. But first, Kristin, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation about ketamine as a healing tool. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I started my career out in California where I grew up. I worked in the state hospitals out there for about a decade, and I've been East Coast based out in Brooklyn, New York for the last 7 years or so. So as far as a little bit more about my clinical background and how I approach care or treatment. So I started with Mindbloom in the beginning as their lead clinician and helped develop our treatment protocols. I treated our first initial group of individuals, just now over a couple hundred individuals. Things that are what brought me to doing this work is, I think a lot of it started back in working in the state hospitals, and really from my perspective as a care provider and watching people suffer from long-term serious and persistent mental illness. And after a period of time, a lot of what we left with, what we were seeing with individuals is side effects from medication. So you have maybe symptoms that aren't fully resolved or in remission, and then we're also now dealing with the side effects from medications long term. It sort of becomes your preface of how you approach treatment with individuals, and traditionally that a large group won't have full remission of symptoms and full relief from pain and suffering. So I've always been just really open-minded and really on the search of what other kind of tools that are out there to help alleviate pain and suffering from people, and do so in a way that doesn't have this really heavy burden of side effects. So I really am a firm believer of that there's got to be something better out there. And when we understand that there's certain tools that have been available to us that alleviate pain and suffering, how can we then utilize these tools, get them available to more people, do it in a way that's cost effective and safe, and really just approach all of this from an ethos of harm reduction. And we have something that's available to help somebody, how can we then reduce their harm and their suffering? So that's sort of how I ended up with Mindbloom. Really excited about the work that we're doing there. So just briefly going on our approach, there's a lot of different approaches to using ketamine as a healing tool. So I'll talk really specifically here, or my approach is really just through my experiences and how we would approach treatment with Mindbloom, but it's by no means everybody's approach to using the medicine. And it's a medicine that's a really valuable tool in a lot of different care modalities or methods of delivering or receiving the medicine. So at Mindbloom, something really important to us is, like I mentioned, is about increasing access to care, removing barriers to treatment. So we know ketamine has traditionally been offered in settings where you need clinician time, you're maybe in a clinician's office with an intramuscular injection for a few hours or hooked up to an IV. Our approach is how can we then remove some of that in-person clinical time and make this care where we're removing that barrier of having to actually go into a clinic to receive treatment, really building up a safe space or a safe container within our own homes, and that thereby reducing that cost significantly. So that's really our model is a remote treatment-based model with a ton of integration and support and work done around the medicine. So we understand that the medicine is a really valuable tool on its own, but is that much more of a valuable tool or medicine when we do all the work of integration around the medicine afterwards, all that work around set and setting before taking the medicine. So.
Okay. So, all right. Before we dive even further into the way you do things, you've said a lot of things that I knew nothing about at all. So let's start at the very beginning.
Sure.
What is ketamine?
Yeah, so ketamine is a medication that's been used since the 1970s or so, initially used for its analgesic and anesthetic properties. So it was carried by soldiers out in the battlefield and given for individuals in pain because it's rapid acting. And as time went on, people using the medicine realized that they were seeing also an effect on depression. So how the medicine works, it's the dissociative anesthetic. It's works through the glutamate pathway, so it's glutaminergic, and through that activation of glutamate in our brain, I think on a high level, I think about it sets off a cascade of events. It's actually a really interesting medicine because it works in a lot of different receptors in our body in different ways, but I'll talk about the most understood ways right now. So
hold on one second.
Yeah.
I have to back up just a little bit. Again,
Sure.
Since I am a complete novice, I have to make sure I understand. You say ketamine is medicine. Does that mean that ketamine is not derived from a plant? Ketamine is a synthetic medicine that was developed in the 70s in a laboratory.
Yes.
And it was developed as an analgesic anesthesia, but a side effect of it was to address depression. Does that mean that a side effect was that people felt a little bit more elevated and euphoric as opposed to down in the dumps and depressed? Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. It's sort of through the evolution of time and using the medicine. Those common stories I'll hear from some of the individuals I've worked with is that I went to my dentist's office and I had some work done, and I came out from the dentist and feeling just really great. I've been in kind of the slumps of depression, and they made that correlation between whatever I was given with the dentist. Somehow I left there feeling, my tooth maybe in pain, but just feeling better on an emotional level. So I'm assuming that just from my experiences with individuals, that's sort of a narrative that's evolved over time. And
Sure. I mean, that's why some people take a blood pressure medicine for anti-anxiety.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Okay, I get that. So now you've gone into a little bit more of the science of it. So you're saying glutamate. What is glutamate exactly? And I do understand the idea of receptors, since we talk about cannabis a lot, the different, CB1 and CB2 receptors, that we have multiple kinds. Even women have estrogen receptors. So I do understand there's receptors throughout our body and brain. But if you could, since we're a non-medical crowd, and by the way, my little disclaimer is, even though Kristin Arden is a medical professional, she is not diagnosing any one of you at all, cannot diagnose you, cannot give you any very specific medical information or advice for you. We're just speaking broadly to explain the terms, the process, and what the heck this is all about. So back to glutamate receptors. If you slow it down a little, because you're speaking a foreign language right now.
Yeah, sure.
So just that top line view of clearly it's doing something in our brains. Go for it.
So on a really high level, I think about ketamine as a medicine is kind of like a fertilizer in our brain. So how that works on a more cellular level is that glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in our body. So taking the ketamine sets off a series or a cascade of events that are activated through the glutamate pathway. One of the primary ways in which we understand ketamine works is through that cascade of events, something in our brain being developed called BDNF. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's a protein in our brain, which I think about as kind of a building block in our brain. So that's really the primary protein responsible for that neuroplasticity, or that bolstering of the neurons in our brain, specifically the parts of our brain that are responsible for higher level cognitive functioning, emotional processing, our memory, which we know through time, and we can actually see on brain studies that these parts of our brain get particularly worn down and beaten down through the response from stress over time. Something in our body that gets activated from stress called cortisol, and we know that to be extremely caustic on parts of our brain. And there's actually really fascinating brain studies that will look at a healthy person's brain, right, on a more looking at the dendrites and neurons, and compare it to a person's brain that has depression or anxiety. And you can actually see that the neurons and the dendrites of an individual's brain with depression and anxiety look kind of withered and worn down. I'd say it's similar, we can compare it to how a tree looks like in the winter. And we look at that healthy person's brain, and at cellular level, they don't look like that. They look more like just robust and lush, kind of like a tree would be in the summertime or the springtime. What ketamine does is essentially goes in and fertilizes those parts of our brain and really builds up that density of the neurons. So if we think about that and why that matters, I like to continue to use the analogy with the tree. So if you think about our brains, if like we have a thought, right? Like maybe it's this negative thought, or it makes us really hard on ourselves, or this thought of fear, right? And we send that up the trunk of our tree. Remember our tree, it looks like a tree in the winter, and it maybe has 3 branches left that it can go down. And it's one of those branches is fear of failure, right? Or one of those branches is the catastrophizing, right? Like it's all going to end really bad. And maybe the other way is why even bother, right? So what ends up happening is we have these negative, worn down pathways. Is really our only way to understand something that's triggering for us, or an emotion that's coming for us. And we're just reusing these same beat down pathways. So we, on a neurobiological level, have a lot less mental flexibility and dexterity. So ketamine being, if you imagine after that treatment, if you're that tree in the springtime and we're sending thoughts up the trunk of that tree, we now have a lot more options available of how we can then process that trigger or that emotional response. And hopefully through the work that we're doing in the treatment sessions, you have some new positive insights that have been gained about yourself as well, which are then reinforcing those new pathways that have been laid out for you.
This is mind-blowing. This is so fascinating. And I love this tree analogy because I can see it. I can totally relate and understand. And I have all these new questions actually racing through my brain that I want to get to. We also have a few questions already coming up in chat that we will get to as well. But so my next thought is, you mentioned something about, I think, infusion maybe, or injection, which completely puzzled me. How has ketamine been administered initially? And then you talk about some differences that Mindbloom is doing. So then how has that changed, or what are you doing to change the traditional way of administering ketamine? Yeah. And just so you know, the next place I'm going after is like, how do you take this stuff? What are the immediate effects versus the long term? Because right now we're talking this fertilizing is all a longer term. And I also want to know how long is it going to take? I should be writing all this down. I'm just full of questions. Okay, start with, how do you usually take it in? And then what's different about the process that you do now? There we go.
Yeah, so I think helpful to break it down to the core of what it is. So what we're dealing with is generic racemic ketamine, right? So the variability from one place to the next is all essentially around the route of administration. Okay. And then also, too, from place to place, there's a lot of variability in the prep work and the support and integration around the experience.
Okay.
So really at the core level, it's all the same medicine. When we're talking about Spravato is something that's a little bit different, but if we're talking about what we're using generic racemic ketamine. The variability from from IV to intramuscular, so intravenous, intramuscular to the tablets, you really see that variability, which is based on how fast that medicine comes into your body. And a lot of that is dependent on that route of administration. An example being that we know intravenously that you're getting essentially 99% of the medicine, and it's going into your system and flooding your brain. So your brain is getting flooded with the medicine, just the fastest onset. Intramuscular takes a little bit longer to come into the system over, a few minutes. So it's still pretty quick, around 93% bioavailability. But you still a lot of times get this more of a feeling of being shot out or into the experience, or maybe shot down since we're going deeper within ourselves. But that's really an effect, or my way of understanding why is an effect of how fast your medicine comes into your system and that flooding of the blood-brain barrier to come to serve with the medicine.
Sure.
But the way that we use ketamine at Mindbloom is through tablet form.
Okay.
So the tablets, you'll notice our dosing models a lot different than the standard IV, IM models because our bioavailability with the tablets is much lower. So you might experience how you experience the tablets is maybe more of a getting in a raft and floating downstream as opposed to being maybe shot out to the moon. That's really around the rate in which the medicine comes into your system, and it's sort of like a slow, more gradual onset and then tail out of the experience. So I'd say the onset is about 10 minutes or so, and you stay in the experience for about an hour. So it's more of that gentle and in and out. But we still are receiving the same effects as one would typically get with intravenous and intramuscular. Our whole reason of doing this and doing this differently with the tablets is so that we can significantly reduce the cost and increase availability of the medicine. So
you mean decrease the cost and increase the availability in terms of access to the medicine versus bioavailability.
Right,
in a tablet form, bioavailability, the ability for your body to process it and enter it into your bloodstream, break the blood-brain barrier, et cetera, for you to feel the effects, will be reduced. But you're saying the benefits overall are going to be pretty much the same. The experience of delivery is different. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, and we could typically get to about the same. It's not going to be, we do have a sort of a wall where we hit because we're limited based on just the cells in our mouth will only absorb so much and then they kind of stop absorbing. So we definitely cannot go up into these higher ranges of dosing that you can get with an IM or IV experience. But for most people, it's still very valuable treatment, and we're seeing great results.
Okay, so now the next question. I'm ready to ask you the personal questions. Have you tried this? What does it feel like? But I'm not going to go there unless you want to. But what I want to know is, what does it feel like? I mean, what do patients say they experience?
Yeah,
I can't even imagine. I have no idea.
Yeah, and I'm completely comfortable with disclosing, and I've done my own treatments. I myself have suffered with variable degrees of depression, severe anxiety, panic disorder. I've been through my struggles. I found that ketamine is a really valuable tool to help me get just reconnected with myself, reconnected with the idea that there's something greater out there than me. And I think, when we're dealing with feeling down and we're really struggling with anxiety, and a lot of it is, where do we fit in with the world, and what does the world mean, and how are people going to view me or perceive me? We're able to kind of quiet all that chatter and really get connected with ourselves at a deeper level and get reassured that there's something greater than ourselves out there. There's something that's calming and provides ease around that. I would say too, in experiences, and talk a little bit more generally about the experiences that I see people have. I'd say there's a huge variety of experiences based on dosing, based on the individual. I would say I've been working with individuals that even staying at the same dose. You can see a huge variability from one session to the next. So sessions can be some really common descriptors. I'd say is that it being related to a deep meditative state or a trance-like state, a lucid dream-like state. I'd say that you can find yourself at a place where your body's feeling really calm and relaxed on the outside, and maybe your mind's still kind of busy and going. And we do some work similar with like we do with meditation, kind of quiet our mind and really focus on the sensations of what does it feel like to be in this space of calm and relaxation, and what if I did try to bring in something that would maybe be a trigger for me or cause me anxiety, and what if I brought that in and I didn't have that same fearful response that I would normally have in my day-to-day. I mean, that's huge, right? With us working with that, of just having experienced that or visualized that. I had this interaction with this thing that's really scary for me, and it didn't elicit that same response. So that's huge. And we really work on how do we hold on to that, and using that treatment space as sort of like a microcosm for the world around us, and practicing things there that we then hope to be able to use that medicine to get some flexibility with our responses to things, and then using that as a practice space so that we can try to have that same response outside of our work with the medicine. I've had some other common experiences are with visuals, and we talk about kind of a more traditional psychedelic experience. Some of the visuals that I hear really common are archetypal in nature, are maybe seeing yourself at a cellular level or out on the different spatial planes. Some of the visuals are much more specific and kind of like watching your life go by on a film reel. If you're seeing clips of your life and you're having sort of bird's eye view or outsider's view to gain just a different, more insight or a different perspective on that thing from that your memory is carrying with you. I hear really commonly about people getting into a space or a degree of internal dialogue with themselves, which is, I like to think about our conscious mind having a one-to-one session with our inner healer, and how can we then learn through that process or gain new insights about ourselves through that internal dialogue.
So this all sounds, there's like a cognitive experience, there's a brain mind kind of experience, but you've also talked about sort of a physiological change as well. So while a person is going through these various experiences, you were saying it actually could create new branches on that tree of their brain, new pathways of experiencing and processing information. So is that correct? I mean, am I?
Yeah,
okay.
You got it.
Okay, so it's not just, because right now what you're describing is that experience.
Yeah.
So it's experience, and through the medication, through the experience, new pathways are forming for more options of ways to process stress, trauma, anxiety, depression. So people are talking in chat a little bit about PTSD. And somebody asked the question about how ketamine and cannabis either work together or not. Take us through the idea of somebody who's suffering from PTSD. It seems like it's a combination of stress, memory, both mental memories, flashbacks. I guess, okay, this is where I'm going with this. I'm hearing all this. It sounds interesting, fascinating. It sounds enticing, but it also sounds scary. So if somebody has had a traumatic event, they have PTSD from it, and they're already living with reliving the flashbacks of it. Do you get bad trips on ketamine? Could that experience be overwhelming or scary? Like, how do you process, and again, post-traumatic stress disorder, let's just look at that for a moment, because that's usually typically related to trauma.
Right.
How do you get through that with ketamine?
Yeah, all great questions. So I think, a really big important part of this is, there's always the chance of a bad trip. And I think a lot of that comes into setting, right? Like, how are we prepared for this? What kind of container are we held in when we take the medicine? So I wanted just to touch on that for a minute, and then I'll get into how we approach this. So I'd say, with us, it's starting with an evaluation, there's always a discussion about past traumas, so that we understand how to best be there, be of a support to somebody. Also, having an open discussion about what is out there or what is within ourselves that might come up for us for a treatment. So us as clinicians and as guides, we have that discussion ahead of time and just understanding how we need to be there to best support somebody.
Okay.
And also, we have a conversation in the very beginning too around fears around the medicine. So what's your anxiety level at coming into this? What kind of things are you afraid of happening? And we start having that discussion right from our initial interaction with somebody about how do we build safety into the experience. So I think, some of the things that we talk about is actually our mantra is to trust and let go and be open. And so in that TLO, we really have to have that safety has to be built into that, or we can't let go and we can't be open. So the safety really starts with the trust and trusting with the medicine. We're showing up and we're trusting the medicine. We're trusting the medicine to do what it's intended to do and bring that healing to us. We talk about our inner healer a lot, or our inner healing and intelligence. So we believe that we have an innate ability to heal ourselves from within. Kind of like if we cut our finger, we don't have to tell our finger to stop bleeding or think about it, it stops bleeding on its own. Our mind is a part of our body. We believe that our mind, has an ability to heal. We just have to remove some of these rigid defenses that were propped up or held together in our daily so that we can tap that part of ourselves at a deeper level. So we're really setting up this experience with safety built into it, and the idea that anything that comes up for us is coming up for us so that we can heal. We're having conversations about understanding that sometimes things do get a little bit worse before they get better, because what we're essentially doing from the psychological level is tapping deep within our psyche and subconscious and stirring things up and bringing them to the surface so that we can then, in the days that follow, do that work around the medicine of making sense of the experience, understanding how that is valuable for you, or how can you use that content to help weave you into more of a state of wholeness, and then making sure that we're safe and understanding all of that content. So I think in overall that setting or framing of the experience around the idea that anything that comes up for you is coming up so that you can heal, having that safe container around you so that we talk right in the beginning, especially if we have trauma, about so what are our plans, and say this brings up some stuff for you that has an essence of trauma. What are your plans to integrate this and to have it be something that you learn and heal from, as opposed to kind of leaving you raw and unsettled. So we talk right in the beginning and treatment planning of where's your plan after this of integrating this content. We do give some support on our side, but I always recommend, especially with trauma, that somebody has a place of mind or a person in mind that will help them process or work through any of the content that comes up. I will say that typically, at least with how we use the ketamine, that the medicine has just an empathic, loving, warm nature about it. And it's
like the cannabis plant.
Right. This is it's something of the experience of when things come up, or the people I've worked with when things come up. And a lot of it is around that setting and knowing that they're supported. And we talked about this ahead of time, that they're able to embrace these things with compassion, acceptance, self-love, healing, as opposed to this thing came up for me and I'm really scared about it. And I feel like I need to run and hide from it, or I feel like this has left me worse off than I was when I started.
So let me just share, Debbie was sharing some interesting things in chat. She says she has complex PTSD with depression and anxiety. She's used ketamine. She did a series of 6 ketamine infusions last year and a couple of boosters since. She's also used ketamine lozenges at home, which have helped her. She said when she did the infusions by IV, she always felt like she was floating and interacting with these vivid rivers of color. It was so cool because it was the first time that I felt like I didn't have to do anything. I could just be. That sounds very pleasant, actually. One of the things that just came up for me when you said to make sure that people have a plan, a person, some sort of process to follow these treatments. What about since you're doing these remotely, they take the tablet, the process takes a while for it to begin to activate. Then they're in this state. Are you all there remotely as a guide? And then should they have set up somebody in near proximity who knows that this is happening just in case? Like I hate to be sort of a Debbie Downer or a pessimistic kind of person, but I'm speaking right now, questions that I personally have, personal fears, and I don't think I'm alone. So literally, should I have somebody on the ready just in case?
Yeah, so great question too. Absolutely. I mean, for us, safety is a priority, and it's actually part of our process, or one of our requirements in our process is that you can't take the medicine home alone. So you have to have somebody there physically with you.
Okay.
The first 2 times that you take the medicine, you're doing it, we call it a virtual visit. So we've tried our best to recreate what we would do if we had a space. And it's a 2.5-hour block of time. So you're on Zoom the first and last 30 minutes. So your experience is sort of bookended by us being there as support. Then you have a 90-minute block of time off of Zoom where you're at your safe space with your peer support there close by if you need them. And a phone number for us if, say, your peer treatment monitor wants to call us, they have a question or concern about something, or say you need additional support in that time that we're off Zoom before the time that we're supposed to jump back on Zoom together. So we go through that first 2 times together, really determining if you're safe with the medicine, determining the level of support that you need. And then it's everybody has a unique treatment plan developed for them based on their needs. So it's those first 2 times with us, and then we go from there based on what the needs are. So I think it's super important. You have to have somebody home with you when you do this. Really, one, to make sure that you're safe physically. The other side too, if we think about what this medicine is, it's a dissociative substance. So for us to really feel like we're safe to disassociate and let go of this conscious realm around us and tap deep within ourselves, knowing that somebody's there holding that space for us, somebody there protecting us, somebody will be there to just hold our hand or be reassuring for us if we need them. All of that there really helps us let go and not really have to worry about what's going on around us.
So, all right. So this is, oh gosh, my brain is just flooded with thoughts, questions, fears. Like I feel a lot of anxiety right now, even thinking about this, even though it sounds very helpful. So clearly, you could probably tell I deal myself with depression, anxiety, PTSD. And so, but it's just like coming up. It's coming up for me. I want to go to so Rita had some questions, and a lot of the things you already answered. You do a lot of intake in advance to make sure you understand what the person is dealing with. You set things up verbally. You set things up so that they are able to create a safe and comfortable space. They have some supervision. You're there at the beginning on Zoom. They have their experience. You're there at the tail end, but you're also at the ready in case something comes up during that experience, and their peer can help facilitate any intervention that might be needed. So I get that piece of it. What about what is sort of the shortest treatment plan someone has gone through and really felt some good results or seen some good outcomes versus can this be also necessary to be long-term? And then can this be addictive? That's another one of those fear things that I have in my head. Okay.
Yeah. So as far as what does a treatment plan look like? I'd say, through my experiences, kind of broken it down into 3 ways where this can go if it's something that's going to work for you. So I'd say we find out pretty early on if it's something that's going to work for you, which is something I really like about it from my side, because it's not us waiting 6 weeks to see if the medicine's going to work, and then we have to slowly titrate it up. And so maybe you're 3 months in and we realize that the medicine hasn't helped you. With the ketamine, it's actually, also referred to as a RAD, which is a rapid-acting antidepressant. So it's a group of agents that are tell pretty quickly if somebody's going to respond to it. So really like that part of it, so we can really hone in early on the just overall value of this treatment for you.
Okay.
So I'd say that the three ways that I sort of see it go is that our treatment is 4 treatments per course.
Okay.
So that in that first course of treatment, there's a group of individuals that I've worked with that have an experience where they've had some sort of functional shift within themselves about how they view themselves and how they view the world around them. And it's sort of that idea of once you see it, it's kind of hard to unsee it. And so people are able to grab onto that and take that growth with them. And if that is the kind of thing that allows them to find resolve from whatever it is that's causing them pain and suffering, then we might not see them again, right? Because they've had this thing that's happened that's allowed them to have a functional shift in their values, how they view themselves and the world. There's another group of individuals I work with that maybe we do that first course of treatment and they're feeling really great. I don't hear from them for a month or two or a few months, and they pop back up and they say, hey, I've been doing really good, but maybe I'm starting to notice some of these markers for me that I'm slipping back a little bit, like that intrusive negative thoughts coming back in, or I'm like hyper vigilant and reactive to things all of a sudden, or like this really big event's happened in my life and it's really triggered a downward spiral for me. So those group of individuals will have them go just sort of based on where they're at, if they need to do the treatments, sort of like a series of 4 sort of closer together to help them restabilize, or maybe there's somebody that just needs a booster and they'll do one session then and that will really help them regain or get back to that space that they were able to achieve in that first course of treatment. Okay. The third group of individuals, I'd say, definitely aligned with people who have had chronic, refractory, or treatment-resistant mental illness, and on treatment, maybe a lot of different meds and on treatment for a long time. You see that we go sort of more in a pattern of doing that first 4 1 week apart. Then we link back up and talk about the next course of treatment, which our goal is to try to go from, I would say, and generally to, instead of once a week, that maybe we're doing them every 10 days or every 2 weeks for that next course of 4. Then we reconnect and see where they're at that point. And the ideal would be able to then maybe shift it a little further. Now maybe I'm doing my treatment once a month or every other month. But it's a really individualized, iterative process between one person and the next. And the way we design our model is that you never get more than 4 treatments into you at once, and then you're having that check-in. So we're sort of seeing where you're at and where we should go from there, and how does this fit into your overall goals for your mental health. As far as the addictive side of things, so I'd say that ketamine is in the group of substances that would be a moderate risk for addiction. And I'd say to be clear on that, hasn't been any signs or anything that I've found, at least, that shows that there's actual physical dependency that's developed from the medicine, meaning that if you don't have it, you would get sick or get shaky or anything like that. We haven't seen anything like that, but more so along the psychological dependence. And I think that that's something that we really honed in on in the beginning of preventing that. And to talk a little bit more about that, I think, in the individuals that develop that psychological dependence, the whole thing that's catalyzing the use from the beginning is it's different mental process. So it's somebody using this medicine daily, maybe several times a day, because of its euphoric states that it produces and its dissociative states. If you imagine that you're really feeling down and suffering and kind of want to escape from things, if you have something that's fast acting and can kind of give you that escape from the world around you and what's causing you distress, then this would be a really ideal drug for somebody to run and use on that. Of, there's that feeling again. I don't want to feel that. Let me take this. It'll make me feel good. And
like an escape.
An escape, absolutely. How we approach our treatment is completely different for that. I mean, the first thing that we're doing is talking about intentions. And this is what I want to work on for myself. And this is like, we're facing what it is that's giving us pain and suffering head on. We're not using this medicine to disassociate or avoid it. essentially we're doing kind of the opposite of that. We're saying this is what I'm struggling with in the day, in my day by day, and I'm going to take this medicine that will hopefully amplify some things and bring these things to the surface for me, so that I can then using those new pathways that are laid out first on the neurobiological level, but really go in and work on understanding these things that have come up for me. So really, the way that we use medicine is really different from that sort of pathway of somebody that would become psychologically dependent on the medicine. Also, too, why you have to schedule your sessions, why we don't ever send you a ton of the medicine all at once. It's just holding you accountable with the medicine and following your treatment protocol, and us also doing whatever we can to make sure that people are safe.
Okay. A couple of other questions, pretty specific. Some of them are coming in through chat as well. One that came immediately to mind as you began to say things like, if somebody already has mental illness, if somebody is on medications already, and this kind of goes back to the cannabis question too, how does ketamine interact or not interact, interfere or not interfere with cannabis? And also with other kinds of antidepressants or medications that people might be taking, bipolar medications, anything else. Like do they call it contraindications or interactions?
Yeah. So I'd say, overall, we don't have, we'd say each medication is different. I'd say with SSRIs, SNRIs, there's no contraindications for this medicine with that. Works on a different receptor pathway, so we're not really, there's some activation that people are really now starting to dig into in the serotonin receptor pathway, but really it's not as understood, and definitely not the primary mechanism of where we see the antidepressive effects from the medicine. So I think that if you think about on that neurobiological level, or the pharmacodynamics of the medicine, or I take this medicine and what does it do in my brain, it's unique in that we have this whole sort of pathway that's not typically used to treat mental illness. And we're talking about the NMDA receptor pathways of glutamate. One thing that we see commonly used that is in that sort of same receptor group is benzodiazepines. So that's one thing that we have a requirement around, is not taking benzodiazepines within a 24-hour period of time with the ketamine, because there's a chance that it could lessen the effect of the medicine. We do also have requirements around not taking a stimulant while taking the medicine, because the ketamine can be a mild stimulant around your heart. And we do, work with individuals. If say you sat before me and doing a consultation and you were on one of those medications, we come up with a plan of care around what would that look like. I, do treat individuals that use cannabis as well, and haven't found any interactions between the two. I'd say I usually ask people to have as clear of a slate going into the medicine as possible, so we understand exactly what's at function, or what's happening with the medicine and their response to that. So I think on our consultation we go into the details of what it is that you're taking, how do you take this in every day, or in your course of wellness, and then how can we fit the ketamine in around that in a way that would be safe and would make sense.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, how about legality? Is this legal in every state? I mean, you're obviously doing it remotely, but is this not a banned substance? Is this a regulated substance? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so ketamine is a legal substance, or it's a Schedule III controlled substance. So as far as the legalities around it, the way that we use the medicine, so it's been FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. Okay. So we treat off-label for depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. There's people under pain management, not through us, but maybe a pain management center with ketamine. So I think there's a ton of science out there, and really good science showing the efficacy of ketamine to treat other conditions besides treatment-resistant depression. So if you'll see that it's prescribed off-label
And the term off label, just so anyone who hasn't heard that term before, term off label simply means the scientific studies show, or the medicines produced for this particular thing.
Right.
But in my previous example, blood pressure medicine is often prescribed to patients with high anxiety, because that would be an off-label use. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process to get FDA approval for a medication is a really expensive process, and it's very time-consuming. And historically, generic ketamine is a really inexpensive medicine. So if you think from the business side of things, the amount of money that people would be generating to try to get this patented and FDA approved didn't really match up with the overall cost of the medicine. So that's when you, on a high level, thinking about how Spravato came to be and how that drug was patented, which is a Johnson & Johnson patented version of the ketamine. They funded all of that research and the FDA approval process, specifically looking at treatment-resistant depression. And they did that through their patenting of Spravato, which is
say that again. What is it?
Spravato, which is it's essentially, without getting the details, an iteration on generic ketamine, so they essentially split the molecule in half and patented the filtration process so that they can hold onto that patent of their ketamine substance. And through all of that, it kind of made sense for them to put up the money to get the FDA approval process going. So a lot of medicines, if you see that, if it goes into them being generic, generic versions available, or it falls off patent, you'll see a lot more of it being then used off-label. Okay. Even though we use it, tried and true as an off-label substance in a lot of its medications, but we'll never maybe go through that FDA approval process because of that. It's available cheaply and generic.
Got it. And then another question that came up is insurance. Do insurance companies recognize this treatment? Do they cover this treatment at all?
So where we are at currently is that we're able to do help individuals. So we're out of network, but we're able to help individuals with reimbursement for clinician time. So not the actual receiving of the medication and that part of the treatment, but the time that's billed for that time with the clinician. So
the consultation,
okay,
yeah. So the consultation portion of it would be a sort of an out-of-network expense, but there is some recoup to that, but not for the medication itself, not for that treatment section itself.
Right. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So another practical question: costs. I'm sure it's a range, but in general, if someone were to look at a basic 4 treatment block, what kinds of costs are we looking at?
Yeah. So at Mindbloom, our packages start at $1,000 for the first course of treatment, and then treatment renewals are $600.
So when you say first course of treatment, course of 4. So $1,000 for a course of 4 treatments. And that would include everything, including the beginning intake and each session with you at either end, et cetera.
Yeah, the whole guided process that you go through with us. So we have really try to build a high touch process around the medicines. I think I said earlier on, ketamine to be a really valuable medicine, but really adding a network of support around the experience really just is a catalyst for increasing the value and the overall outcomes. And that's our approach. Again, there's a lot of different sort of theories or ideas behind different people and their treatment methodologies, but that's the way that we see this working in our approach to things.
Okay. And then in a very practical sense, are we talking the entire amount paid up front, credit card, or is it in a payment plan based on, throughout the process? I mean, I'm just thinking total practicality at the moment.
Yeah. So we usually have, we take a deposit up front for the consultation, and then if it's, something that you choose not to go through with, then you get refunded the deposit. And then we work with people as far as billing moving forward. Typically what we would do is charge after that first treatment for the remainder of the balance. But we have worked with people, especially in the current situations that we're in, the world's in. We've definitely worked to try to be flexible with people around payments.
Okay. We have just a few minutes left. I see Debbie mentioned something that her how do you pronounce that? The person who administers it to her, the infusions, told her that the research shows cannabis doesn't negatively affect ketamine, but she just needs to avoid alcohol for 24 hours before. So you mentioned stimulants. I would think that alcohol is considered more of a depressant, but is that also something that you make sure of?
Yeah, I mean, that would be something that we would ask us to have. I would recommend, like I think I said, 24 hours around the medicine without other substances, and then we would get into
clean
the more
slate.
But then that's like the high level, and then we get into more of the detailed of what does this mean for you? Are you somebody that maybe you have to have your benzodiazepine the night before to go to bed, or you're going to have a horrible night's sleep, right? Like, so that's something that we have those conversations with people, and I say that that's our high level of, we say that 24-hour period of time with most substances, but then in that consultation with the clinician, they'll work with you on your individualized plan of care.
Can you, because I'm not familiar with benzodiazepine, what's a generic or a known brand name of, like, what kind of medicine is that?
Like Ativan or Klonopin, Xanax.
And that's for depression, anxiety, or?
For anxiety.
For anxiety, okay.
Yeah, some people take it for sleep too.
And for sleep, got it. Well, yeah, often sleep issues are based around anxiety and racing mind to keep you awake. So I can understand that. Okay. This has been fascinating and kind of an intense, I don't have a lot of topics that we talk about where I just feel this super intense, like, I don't know, it brings up a lot for me just to be thinking about something like this. It's fascinating. I'm sure everyone who has been here watching this is just fascinated by this. How do we reach you and reach out to Mindbloom? Like, where do we go to get more information or to possibly participate in this healing process?
Yeah, so on our website, so mindbloom.co, that's the first place to get started if you're curious about would you be a good candidate for this treatment. The first steps would be you filling out our initial candidate survey form, which kind of is a high level of this is something that's going to be that you would maybe be a good candidate for. Then if you make it through that step, you get scheduled with a clinician. There's an intake process that goes on. It's essentially a psychiatric evaluation and then us talking and answering questions about the treatment. So really just a focused evaluation and consultation. On our website, you can also, I think it's hello or support at Mindbloom. It's an email at the bottom. So if you have questions too, before maybe going through that process, you can send in your questions there. That's moderated by our guide team, and they bump things up to the clinicians if the clinicians need to chime in and answer some questions. On our website, we have put together a really robust FAQ section, which I encourage you all to take some time to read through. A lot of really valuable information. There's a tab that goes into the top of our website as well that goes into great detail about the medicine and the how and why of ketamine, both the phenomenological parts or the subjective healing response from the medicine, and then on the neurobiological level. So I think that's all really valuable information there too to check out.
All right, mindbloom.co is where you can go for more information about this ketamine treatment. 4 treatments in that first cycle addresses depression, anxiety. Your brain is like a tree and it helps grow new pathways, new branches, new ways of processing and dealing with these negative thoughts and reliving of negative experiences. I absolutely think it's incredible to learn about this. I am so grateful that you spent some time with us, that you agreed to come on here and answer these questions. Incredibly informative. Thank you, everybody, for being here.